Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Bangani and Ms. Theis for the invitation to speak about the future of work at this symposium. I really wish I could join you at Lanzerac today. It's a place of such wonderful childhood memories for me. I accepted your kind invitation to speak, not because I'm an expert on the topic, but rather so that we as a community will engage in productive discussions about the possibilities of the future of work. And I'm so delighted to hear Lisa and Ujala's presentations converged so beautifully with what I will be talking about, although mine will be a little bit focused on the practical side and a little bit more on the workers, perhaps. And so I'll focus not on repeating so much of what they've already said, so that we will have more time for discussion, as a community. Before I start, yesterday, October 11th, was the first nationwide recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day here in the United States. I acknowledge that the University of Texas at Austin is on indigenous land of the Tonkawa who lived in Central Texas. The Comanche and Apache moved through this area, and today, various indigenous peoples from all over the globe call Austin home. While honoring the many diverse indigenous people still connected to this place on which I join you today, I acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. Recognizing the land in this way is an expression of deep appreciation for those who were here before us. I am grateful to live and work here. And since I'm a daughter of Stellenbosch, in that same spirit, I want to recognize the Khoi Khoi and the San, South Africa's first people who lived on the great expanses of the beautiful Cape and who were among the country's most persecuted people and the most forgotten as well. I hope each of you will take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the indigenous peoples wherever you may reside. Thank you for giving me the space to read the land acknowledgement. Now, several weeks ago, President Ramaphosa announced that South Africa has transitioned to level 2 of the pandemic. But a little more than 18 months into the pandemic, we continue to face uncertainty about the future around the world. In South Africa, you are at level 2. In Texas and in Austin, where I live, we are still at level 4 and hope to move to level 3 in the near future. As we begin to open our libraries or reopen our libraries, library leaders are doing 3 things at once. We are staging the return to work. We are trying to review and assess the changes that we made during the lockdown. And we're trying to chart a new path forward. And much of what Lisa and Ujala both spoke about this morning focus on the path forward as well. So let me talk about the plan to return to work. Going back to the office isn't a silver bullet. We returned here at our library on August 23rd, which was the beginning of the fall semester here. But the return from remote work is ripe with potential for a productive reimagination of the way work gets done. Working from home was a new experience for us in higher education. In particular, corporate America, speaking from the global north, has been quite comfortable doing this for a long, long time, but higher education, not. But now that the universities have reopened amidst an ongoing pandemic, because we're still in a pandemic, what expectations will workers have once they return to campus? Many employees have reflected about what's important to them during lockdown. They saw the benefits of spending more time, perhaps, with their families. They didn't have to travel to go to work on campus or to an office. So for those who drive on crowded highways, they didn't have to sit in traffic or on a bus. It was less expensive, perhaps, to work remotely, assuming that they had all the facilities to do so. No gas, no parking fees, and perhaps more productive time. Perhaps they even experienced a better work-life experience. Not all, but for the most part, I think our workers have embraced the flexibility of working from home. As I said, not all. I just read a research article by Professor Jonathan Jansen, Cyril Walters, and a few others about academic women in South Africa who suffered academic guilt for working at home because they had to fulfill so many roles at the same time and couldn't perhaps produce as much as what they had hoped, in terms of their scholarly work. So enter flexible work arrangements. Let's talk about how we review and assess the changes we made. During lockdown, we made many changes to support academic continuity. Lisa and Ujala both spoke about the libraries being the first on our campuses perhaps to move to the platform, not because but because we had made digital investments in digital infrastructure for a long, long time that prepared us perhaps better than any other agency on campus. So how can we leverage what we have learned during the pandemic as we try to do things a little differently? Now is the time to review those operations. Are they aligned with the changes we had planned BC before COVID? Can we accelerate the changes we had planned? How well have they worked during the pandemic? Can they be sustained? How will our users be impacted by these changes? Charting a path forward. Ujala spoke about the bigger picture. The importance of aligning with institutional expectations, but also our users' expectations. Life has changed for them. Life has changed for all of us. So as we begin to chart a path forward, let's articulate very clearly how work will be done, explain to our staffs the changes that we are about to make or will be making as a result of COVID. For example, flexible work arrangements, or FWAs as we call them here, hours of operation, new workflows, new work that we may not have done before. Next slide, please. So everything is uncertain except change. One of the speakers already said this morning that we have always changed, from Gutenberg to Google. As we reflect on libraries, libraries have constantly evolved to advance and respond to society's needs. Despite the reasons for change, we have retained our core professional values, and Ujala already mentioned that, so I'm going to skip over that so that we can have more time at the end to discuss. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed many things, but what is different is the accelerated pace of change. That, I think, is the biggest difference. Life has changed, expectations have changed, we ourselves have changed. And this change of pace has ushered in new workflows that will shape the future of work to support the mission of our institutions in teaching and research and in learning. So what are some of the areas where we should expect change? Next slide, please. I like to say that we have learned to do things differently through experimentation, and we've adopted a few very different things that we are also doing. I think the areas where we will particularly see change will be access to our physical content. During the pandemic, many of us here in North America and perhaps around the globe had the luxury of providing access, digital access to online, our content in the libraries through HathiTrust. Our services, our spaces, and our operations. I think these are the primary areas where we will definitely see change as a result of the pandemic. As I mentioned already, we forged different workflows to maintain academic continuity, and we transitioned to touchless remote instruction and research support. We created safe, socially distanced spaces. We provided PPEs. We installed plexiglass screens at public service desks. We implemented curbside deliveries, and we reskilled our staff to help in new areas of work, both on-site and online. In our case, our library was closed for more than a year, almost 18 months, as I said. We closed in March 2020 and we reopened in August 2021. One library remained open for curbside pickups, but nobody was allowed to go into the stacks and pick out materials to circulate because of the HathiTrust access and the agreement that we had signed with them that we will not circulate materials that's already available online. So our users have become very, very comfortable with this online access. It's convenient, it's anytime, anywhere. These changes were rapid. We had to change within a week from on-site to online because university was online entirely. So the changes were rapid, but they were also prolonged. 18 months is a long time, and many thought we would be back in the office within a week or month, or by the summer of 2020. In fact, as I said, the pandemic is still not over. But thanks to breakthrough discoveries in science that have enabled us to better understand the virus and its variants and adjust to new ways of engaging with each other, I think we are at a different place perhaps to review some of those operations. So too, we learned to be creative and adjusted our operations and our workflows to continue the critical work that we do. It may have felt initially like a very temporary measure at first, but after 18 months, it feels very permanent now, and it will be, I think, very difficult to turn back the clock in many instances. I'd really like to hear from others in terms of how they are experiencing the return to campus. Those are what I call COVID keepers. So next slide, please. I think after 18 months, we have an opportunity to reflect on what worked. What I have noticed and what I've read from surveys, both within ARL and the kind that Lisa referred to earlier, is that our staffs have become very confident and comfortable with IT. We all had to learn it, right? We've never worked from home in the way that we did during the pandemic. And so taking the computer or the laptop home and having IT technicians at your house helping you to set up your computer so that you might work remotely. 18 months later, I think people feel very, very confident and comfortable with it. I already talked about flexible work arrangements, but that may be a difficult issue to do because there's the issue of equity involved in this. But speaking for the library where I am at a very practical level, the university is embracing flexible work arrangements and providing us with a year-long pilot all the way through the summer of 2022 to test how it might work, even though faculty and students are expected to be back on campus. As a leader of the library, I have the option to provide flexible work arrangements for my workers. So many of them elected to work the 3-2 model. That's 3 days at home, working from home and 2 days on site or the other way around. Nobody can work 100% remotely. They have to come in, even if it's just 1 day a week, they have to come in. The health and safety protocols, I think, will remain as we move into the future. I think there's a new awareness of the importance of that, because we saw how quickly the virus could be spread, and we saw the devastation that it caused everywhere. And I know that in South Africa, I've attended too many Zoom funerals of friends and people that I know. So it was devastating. And I think we need to continue to be careful about protecting both our users, but especially our employees as well. What we have noticed is that there's a distinct user preference for e-resources. We knew that, BC, as well, because we have so many of our content online already. And somebody mentioned they never come into the library, but in fact, they're always in the library because we never close. I always say during the pandemic, even though the building was closed, we were never closed. In fact, we were probably 24/7 during that time, because circumstances at home may have caused somebody to be able, not to be able to come in during the day. And our librarians were available, for them. There's a definite switch and a pivot towards e-resources. And in fact, that will affect the services and some of the operations that we have in our libraries. For example, reserve materials. We have begun to digitize those materials, and will consider a controlled digital lending as we move forward as well. Online platforms to offer hybrid service models. Again, this is our staff, because we had to do Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings. Everybody had to learn how to communicate because we could not get together. And again, there's a big comfort level there. So even as we return, or have returned to our offices, we are still not meeting face-to-face. We are, in fact, I'm sitting in my office, and when I have meetings, we all sit in our offices with our computers on, and we can hear each other in the hallway, so we close our doors so we cannot disturb each other. But that's how we meet, because of the because we prioritize the safety and health of our workers as well. And the last one here is the new deals in e-contracts versus big deals. I know that before COVID, many institutions here in the United States started canceling their big deals. But I think open access has emerged and has been amplified, I think, during the pandemic. And so when we now go into contracts and license agreements, we're looking at guiding principles that will help amplify the need for openness in accessing content. And we see more and more of publishers adopting that model as well. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to just focus very briefly on some of the guiding principles that I'd like to offer, and we can talk more about this in our discussion. Focus on the mission, enhance resilience, embrace flexibility, and respect employee well-being. Next slide. I'm going to start with the mission first. Excuse me. We all understand what the library's mission is. What is important is to make sure that we prioritize what we want to focus on. Look for the purpose. Don't look at the operations only, but look for the bigger picture. Look for the bigger mission. We are everything to everybody. We serve our faculty, we serve our students, we serve our staff, we serve the communities in which we reside. And I'm talking here not just about academic libraries, but even public libraries and other types of libraries. People inherently trust libraries. One of the privileges we have as an institution, library institution, is trust capital. People feel safe in our spaces. People feel that librarians can help them. So focus on the mission of what your library is about or what our libraries are about, and then prioritize within that mission. So, for example, right now, how are we going to support the university as people return to campus? What is our role? What is our value proposition, as Ojala mentioned, for academic continuity? Had it not been for libraries, I agree with somebody who said early on, I don't know if the universities could have continued in the way that they were able to without libraries. I see libraries as catalytic leaders on our campuses. And so let's leverage the opportunity now to focus on that mission, on the new work that we may be able to do now, as well as the new skills, and prioritize those. Next slide. Flexibility. Nothing is certain except change, except that the future will be different. Somebody said this already. It cannot be the same. We cannot put the genie back into the bottle. We have all undergone change. And now it is incumbent upon us to focus on the future, even if we fail. Sometimes we learn, sometimes we lose, and sometimes we learn. As long as we fail forward, I think that's okay. We have so many things to focus on, and we have so many decisions to make. It's impossible to do it right all the time. And so I would focus on flexibility as a core principle as we move forward, because we have seen and personally experienced how quickly things can change. And none of us can say that we're not flexible anymore because of the pandemic. I want to say, if necessary, do pilots if you're not quite sure of whether to go forward with a particular plan. Test drive it through pilots, especially workflows or services, and let your users be the judge of that. We are so lucky to have users who are not shy to let us know what they need, when they need it, and I think we should leverage that. We've demonstrated our ability to come together and pivot to new workflows during the crisis fairly quickly. We are in a position to do so given the long investment, decades of long investment in infrastructure, as Lisa pointed out earlier. Next slide. Resilience. Many staff could not do their regular job from home. My facility staff who focus on making sure things work in the building, cleaning the building, making sure that everybody had what they need in their offices, they could not really do their work from home. But they were open to learning new skills to do something different than their regular job. So my message is to unlock the potential of our staffs. Focus on their potential versus only their current skills. What can they do versus what they have done before the pandemic? Offer opportunities for workers to continue to grow and adapt based on their potential rather than on their existing skills or certification. As leaders, now is not the time to pull back on workforce development, on work development efforts, but instead to double down on commitments to building a resilient workforce that can adapt in the face of constant change. Next slide, please. Employee well-being. This is probably the most important area that I want to leave with you today. Our personal protection, workplace safety, and the benefits and security. With the lasting effects of the pandemic on our workforce, we should rethink our responsibilities to our employees. Today, we've talked a lot about the library as an institution and how we can serve our institutions, both during the pandemic and now beyond. But I really would like for us to focus on our workplace and the culture. Think holistically about that to address the changing priorities in safety and in mental health. Due to COVID-19, employees are placing increasing value on feeling safe, feeling protected, and prepared across all areas of well-being for themselves and for their families. They need a sense of security through benefits and other support. We as leaders should ask ourselves if our human resources in the library is positioned to make the impact they can and should be making across the library. HR is critical and should take a leading role in helping the organization and the workforce adapt to changing organizational and business requirements. So the question is, does HR have the capacity to extend their influence in the areas to help position the organization to both recover and help employees thrive over the next decade or so? So in conclusion, I would like to say that, yes, the pandemic created a paradigm shift that will affect the future of work, but will libraries disappear? I don't think so. We as libraries have the opportunity now to position ourselves for a post-COVID world where purpose, potential, perspective, and possibility are no longer future-oriented aspirations, but the reality of the here and the now. The risk of not positioning ourselves for sustained change is more than just being behind. It's the possibility of never catching up at all. And we talked about relevance, remaining relevant to our users. As I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert on the topic. I have experience, direct and first-hand experience as a library leader here in my library and within my Association of Research Library Organization. And I don't have a crystal ball about the future of work, but each of us operates our libraries in a different campus milieu. So it is natural for us to focus on our own needs. However, the pandemic crisis offers us as a profession an opportunity to embrace new possibilities to do our work. Final slide. In that spirit, I invite you to come together because alone we each can go faster, but it's together that we can go further. Thank you.